I never thought a single moment could redraw the lines in my own family. But that night my son looked me straight in the eye and spoke as if everything I had built, everything I had given somehow belonged to him. He wasn't joking. He wasn't confused. He believed it. And when I realized how far he had already gone behind my back, something in me shifted for good. If you've lived through anything like that, tell me your story below. The moment I stepped through Evan's doorway in West Lynn, that new Christmas sweater felt lighter than it should have. It was part of a small family tradition, something my late wife started decades ago. I barely had time to set my coat aside when Evan's voice cut through the room. "Still wearing those things, Dad? Fits better at a nursing home party." A few of his friends burst into laughter. Their amusement wasn't loud, but it carried. The sweater hung in my grip, and for a second, the whole tradition shrank into a prop in someone else's joke. My son didn't stop there. He leaned on the counter with the confidence of a man who believed the world bent toward him. One guest nudged another, whispering something that ended with, "The Bend House." They spoke like they already knew the punchline, like the place was his to flaunt. Evan raised his glass. "Winter rentals are filling up fast. Took a few deposits already. It's going to pay for itself soon." Not once did he look my way to acknowledge those words came from a lie he'd been letting grow. He never asked permission. Never even hinted he was treating the property as his own. A line inside me shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. The kind of shift you feel when someone doesn't just cross a boundary. They grind their heel into it. I set the sweater on a chair and stepped back from the noise. No scene, no confrontation. Years of habit kept me composed. Just scanned the room once, watching people carry on, as if Evan had every right to do what he was doing. The porch offered a bit of space enough for me to breathe without giving away what churned beneath the surface. Staying silent had always felt easier. Let him shine. Let him save face. Let the evening pass. By the time I walked toward my car, the house still hummed behind me. A notification buzzed against my palm. A message from the bank, a confirmation request for a secondary mortgage application for the Bend property. My thumb hovered over the screen. There was no mistaking the wording. Someone had used my name, my asset, my signature, or an imitation of it. The headlights from a passing car swept across the driveway. That faint movement grounded me long enough to read the message again. No error. No misunderstanding. Someone had planned this. The instinct to let things settle rose first. The part of me that spent years trying to keep my son close. But another part, the quieter one I'd ignored too many times, pushed back. Something had already shifted at that party. This message just confirmed it. The phone kept buzzing as I reached the Pearl District garage. By the time I walked into my apartment, the notifications had piled up booking requests for the Bend House payment confirmations and service approvals I'd never seen before. All of them listed Evan's name as the primary contact, and mine as some background guarantor, as if I were a silent partner in my own property. New messages flooded the inbox faster than I could clear them. Guest inquiries, instructions for winter maintenance, reminders for repairs Evan had apparently scheduled without asking. None of it looked accidental. A pattern had formed, and it pointed in one direction. A text from a man I knew in Bend arrived next. "Did you transfer the place folks here say, Evan's the new owner? Just checking before I congratulate him." That sentence landed harder than I expected. Rumors didn't start themselves. They needed fuel, and Evan had clearly provided more than enough. Another message popped up on the screen, this time from Evan. "Ba won't mind if I use the property, right? It's just temporary. I've got things lined up." Nothing about permission, nothing about limits, just assumption layered on entitlement. Years of brushing things aside made the old reflex kick in, keep the peace, Don't turn this into a fight. Let the tension fade. Maybe he didn't understand the risk he was creating. Maybe he thought he was helping. Maybe he... Then a tag blinked across social media, a group photo of Evan's friends posing in front of the Bend house, captioned, "Our winter getaway. Can't wait." More photos followed. Comments poured in praising Evan for finally using his property wisely. No one questioned the story. They accepted it because Evan told it with confidence, and confidence often outshines truth. Pressure spread outside our family before I even had a chance to react. People weren't attacking me. They were reacting to what they believed. Still, the effect was the same. My name drifted further from the house with every post. The sense of ownership, legal, personal, emotional, thinned until I felt like a guest in a place I'd paid for, maintained, and protected. The air in the apartment felt cramped, so I left and walked toward the river. A short stroll brought me to the bar Jordan managed. He was wiping down a table when I stepped in, and one raised eyebrow told me he already sensed something was wrong. "How long have you let them use your name like a hall pass?" he asked once we sat down. The directness hit harder than the drink he set in front of me. I wanted to help them stand on their own came out before I fully thought through the truth of it. Jordan leaned back, studying my face the way people do when they're weighing how much truth a person can handle. "You're not helping them stand. You're letting them stand on your shoulders." The words slid under my defenses with more accuracy than I cared to admit. Years of covering gaps for Evan, smoothing over his impulsive choices, stepping in whenever he stumbled, it all came rushing back in a single wave, and none of it looked like support anymore. It looked like erasure. My role kept shrinking each time I yielded ground. Jordan didn't push further. He didn't need to. A man who manages a bar near the river hears enough stories to recognize a pattern. Walking back home, the city lights blurred into something I didn't bother to define. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. When I stepped into the apartment again, the silence wasn't soothing. It felt like the pause before a difficult truth settles. The Bend House documents were stored in a file drawer I rarely opened. Pulling it out sent a faint ache through my chest, not from the weight, but from everything that file represented. Years of work planning sacrifice. A promise I'd once made to myself and to the family I tried to keep intact after my wife passed. Papers spread across the table. Contracts, deeds, original drafts. All the things I should have reviewed more often. Evan's recent behavior flickered through my mind as I scanned each page. He hadn't just overstepped. He'd taken advantage of the silence I'd offered him like it was permission. A faint tremor reached my hand when my eyes landed on the signature I'd written years ago. Clear ink, clear terms, majority ownership retained by me. That line sat on the page with a steadiness I no longer felt in my own life. The documents stayed open in front of me. My thumb traced the edge of the contract, not for nostalgia, but to anchor myself to something factual and unaltered. Pages rustled under my hands as I kept sorting through the Bend files. A notification blinked on my laptop, an older email I must have overlooked months ago. The sender was the brokerage firm that handled the original purchase. Their message was brief, almost routine, yet nothing about it felt routine anymore. Your son contacted us requesting updates to the ownership record for smoother transactions. Please confirm. The words stirred something deeper than irritation. A dull ache formed at the thought that Evan had been laying groundwork long before the winter party. Maybe he believed the house was drifting into his control because I'd stepped back too far for too long. Maybe my attempts to give him room had looked like surrender. A question surfaced that I hated acknowledging. Had I given him the impression the property was his by default? The phone rang before I could finish that thought. The number was from Bend. A man with a friendly tone introduced himself as someone who'd met Evan through a mutual acquaintance. "He told us you're about to transfer the deed. Said it's just paperwork now. Thought I'd reach out and congratulate your family." Pieces of the story trailed off into half-formed assumptions, but the direction was unmistakable. Evan was telling people a version of events that made my signature a mere formality, waiting to happen. I asked the caller when Evan mentioned this. "Couple weeks ago," he said. Sounded official. Ending the call didn't stop the churn in my chest. Evan wasn't guessing. He wasn't exaggerating. He was preparing. A message from him appeared on my screen moments later. "Don't make a big deal out of this." That was it. No explanation. No acknowledgement. Just an instruction to stay small while he expanded his reach. Turning back to the laptop, I tried accessing the utility accounts and tax folders linked to the Bend property. Several were suddenly restricted. A notice popped up stating ownership update request in progress. Someone had attempted to alter data in a system that required legal validation. None of those requests came from me. A tension built in my shoulders as I steadied myself. Letting emotion take over wouldn't fix anything. So a different instinct stepped in, the one honed over decades of technical work, where precision mattered more than panic. Each document on the table was photographed and stored. Every receipt, deed, and service contract had a digital copy by the time I finished. Automatic payments tied to the house were postponed. The old transfer draft Evan once pushed me to consider was saved separately with a note attached, never executed. A friend from my earlier years in the field practiced law, now mostly real estate work in Salem. Calling him felt strange after so long, but he picked up on the second ring. "What do you need, Mike?" he asked after the briefest greeting. "How easily can someone push an ownership change without consent?" He didn't answer right away. "Not legally," he finally said. "But people try. If someone has partial access or old documents, they can start the process. Stopping it requires fast action." His tone sharpened when I mentioned the bank messages and the blocked accounts. "Get everything documented. Don't confront him yet. Secure your end first." Ending that call brought no comfort. A thin crack ran through my trust in Evan, one I'd ignored for years. Every sign pointed in the same direction now, and the denial I'd held on to began slipping. Evan's last message replayed in my head. "Don't make a big deal out of this." A son telling his father to step aside while he rearranged the family's landscape. Returning to the stack of papers, I pushed aside lingering hope that this was all some misunderstanding. That hope had kept me anchored in place while the ground shifted under me. Leaning over the table, I searched for the original purchase packet. It was buried under newer files, still held together with the same worn binder clip. Pulling it free sent a faint shiver up my arm, not from the cold, but from recognition. These pages were the foundation Evan was trying to rewrite. Scrolling through the online portal once more, I saw the same message access restricted due to ownership changes under review. My jaw tightened. Someone was absolutely pushing for control. The thought of Evan orchestrating all this gnawed at me. A parent isn't supposed to suspect their own child of manipulation, yet here I was, tracking evidence like I was preparing for litigation. The internal conflict pulled hard love against boundaries, memory against reality. A breath steadied me. The next step wasn't confrontation. It was understanding exactly where the truth ended and his story began. My fingers closed around the contract that mattered most. Ink, still crisp terms, still binding. Pulling it closer, I focused on the line that had anchored everything from the start: majority ownership retained by MR. That sentence held more weight now than it ever had. A new alert from the bank greeted me before sunrise. The subject line carried the same weight as a summons a second mortgage application tied to the Bend property had been filed. The bank claimed they were reviewing ownership identity inconsistencies. That phrasing left no room for comforting interpretations. Someone had pushed a formal request through official channels. The message didn't hide behind ambiguity. It detailed the application date, referenced my name, and flagged discrepancies that triggered their verification protocol. Everything pointed toward Evan. The steps he'd taken earlier in the week had been quiet, indirect. This one wasn't. This was deliberate. Calling him wasn't something I wanted to do yet. Avoiding the conversation felt worse. His voice came through brisk, impatient, as though I were interrupting something important. "You filed for a second mortgage on the Bend house." A pause followed, then a dismissive breath. "Dad, you haven't used that place in ages. Leaving it untouched doesn't make sense." "It's under my name," I replied, steadying my tone. For now, he said, each word clipped. "I'm thinking about the family first. This property could bring real income." Any illusion that this was confusion dissolved right there. He wasn't uncertain. He was staking a claim. Not emotionally, legally, strategically. More details surfaced over the next few minutes, each one scraping at the edge of patience. Evan had already accepted deposits from multiple groups for winter stays. He'd scheduled upgrades for the heating system and roof repairs, all billed to my accounts. He even linked an estimated tax report to my financial profile without so much as a heads up. Hearing it said aloud made the whole situation feel heavier. Not only had he assigned himself authority he didn't have, he'd exposed me to potential liabilities with no plan to address the consequences. "What exactly were you expecting me to do when the bills showed up?" I asked. "You worry too much," he replied. "It'll work out. People do this kind of thing all the time." There was nothing casual about signing strangers into a home that wasn't his. Nothing harmless about forging a trail that led back to me. Ending the call left the apartment colder than before. The Bend property wasn't just a house. It held years of work planning promises I made to myself after my wife passed. Watching Evan twist it into something he could leverage created a crack that no rationalization could cover. Jordan was the only person I trusted to hear this without turning it into gossip or pity. He lifted 2 fingers in greeting as I walked into the bar, then studied my face before asking anything. "What happened now?" "A lot," I muttered, dropping into the seat across from him. He waited until I finished explaining the mortgage request, the deposits, the tax filings. No commentary, no shock. Just that steady attention he gave when listening mattered more than speaking. When I finally stopped, he tapped the counter once. "How long do you plan on holding the door open while he drags your whole life through it?" The question wasn't an attack. It was a mirror. One I'd avoided looking into for too long. His words settled not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't about peace in the family anymore. It was about control, and Evan had taken enough of it without permission. Returning home carried a different rhythm. Each step felt measured, deliberate. The documents from earlier still rested on the table, the signature I'd stared at the night before, anchoring everything that needed to happen next. A folder thick with receipts and deeds was gathered under my arm. No hesitation followed. The decision had been forming long before the bank alert arrived. The alert simply snapped it into place. Downtown Portland held a law office I'd used once before. The receptionist greeted me with professional calm, then ushered me through the glass door into a consultation room. My hand released the stack of papers onto the desk with a soft thud. The attorney looked up, waiting. "I need a full review of ownership," I said, my voice even measured. "Every document. Every transfer request, everything tied to the Bend property." He nodded, reaching for the folder. I didn't sit yet. Hands rested on the back of the chair posture, steady not from confidence, but from necessity. The room hummed with the faint noise of printers and distant phones, but none of it pierced the focus forming in me. The attorney thumbed through the documents with the kind of focus that left no room for casual interpretation. He paused at a page marked by a date from early autumn. His brow tightened. "Your son contacted the brokerage months ago," he said. "About what full family transfer procedures, the kind typically used when a parent hands over complete ownership." The words carried a weight that settled hard in my chest. This wasn't improvisation. Evan had been preparing long before the first winter deposit or the social media posts. Each step he'd taken, every assumption, every maneuver had been part of a longer plan he hadn't bothered to share with me. The attorney slid the document over for my review. My signature wasn't on it, but Evan's inquiry was clear. It fit too well with the hints I'd ignored his comments about taking over someday, the way he'd walked through the Bend property, as though assessing future territory, his offhand promises that he'd handle everything later. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with another email. This one had no sender name, just an address I didn't recognize. A PDF was attached, a drafted transfer agreement, completed except for my missing signature. It listed Evan as the sole owner. A section at the bottom outlined his intent to apply for a mortgage immediately after securing the deed. The message included one line. "He's been showing this around." Heat rose in my chest, not the kind that pushed a person to yell, but the kind that made speech feel too small for what needed to be said. My memory pulled up moments I'd tried to forget. Evan brushing off my concerns. "Come on, Dad. One day this will all be mine anyway." Or the times he claimed he'd step in soon, as though I were waiting to hand over the last stable thing in my life. Jordan's voice echoed from days earlier. "He's not after the property. He's after power." The truth of that settled deeper now. A new notification arrived, this time from a cousin in California. "Hey, Evan told us you've been slipping a bit. Said you might have forgotten you transferred the house already. Everything okay?" Another message followed from an aunt. "Maybe let Evan handle things. He said you've been stressed." Their tone wasn't cruel. It was cautious, concerned, shaped entirely by whatever story Evan had spun. He'd taken the very cracks in our relationship and used them as evidence against me. Used my age, used my calmness, used the grief I carried after his mother died. All of it repurposed to make his version of events sound plausible. A few relatives didn't bother to wait for my reply. They simply asked, "Did you really give him the house? Why walk it back now? Are you sure you remember the conversations right?" Those questions stung more than I expected. Not because they doubted me, but because a part of me wondered whether my long silence had helped shape this mess. Staying out of conflict for years had given Evan an arena to rewrite the rules without resistance. My pulse steadied as I returned to the chair. The attorney watched me closely. "Your son is creating a narrative," he said. "If you don't intervene now, the next step won't be rumor. It'll be paperwork." The decision needed no more deliberation. The room felt anchored by one reality. Stepping back would no longer protect anything. Not the house, not the family ties, not whatever remained of my role as a father. "Draft whatever has to be drafted," I told him. He nodded once. He pulled a form from a stack, the heading "Crisp and Final Request to Secure Ownership and Suspend Unauthorized Activity." It was the legal equivalent of drawing a boundary in concrete. Handing me a pen, he said, "This will lock the property. No one can alter records without your notarized authorization. It's the strongest option." The moment called for resolve, not nostalgia. The Bend house wasn't just real estate. It was the last physical piece of a life I'd built with my wife. A life Evan believed he was entitled to reorder. The pen rested between my fingers long enough for a single thought to surface. Letting this go would only teach Evan that taking more was acceptable. He wouldn't stop. Not unless I did. My name moved across the signature line. The ink dried faster than expected, and the attorney gathered the documents without ceremony. "That's the first step," he said. "We'll file immediately." The stack closed with a firm tap. No dramatic relief followed. No clarity sweeping through me. Just a simple, grounded awareness that the choice had been necessary. When I rose from the chair, the weight in my chest didn't lighten, but it steadied. The file sat open on the desk. My signature stood at the bottom, decisive, unmistakable, the beginning of a process I couldn't walk away from now. The attorney didn't waste time. He told me to gather everything: texts, emails, receipts, timestamps, screenshots, even the casual notes I'd exchanged with the Bend broker over the years. Evidence, he said, was the only language institutions respected. So the days that followed turned into a slow excavation of every digital corner tied to the property. Messages from Evan went into a folder first. Some carried a false sense of politeness. Others held the tone of a man speaking from a throne he hadn't earned. Emails from contractors showed approval for upgrades I never requested. The brokerage forwarded a statement confirming Evan had contacted them multiple times. My attorney read through each document and finally remarked, "If he keeps pushing, we'll need a counterclaim ready." Jordan met me at the bar later that afternoon. He watched me sort through the printouts one by one. "You're treating this like a technical glitch," he said. "It's not. He's playing you where it hurts. He's my son slipped out before I could stop it." "That's the hook," Jordan replied. "Not the love. The fear you'll lose whatever is left of the family. That's why you've let him run over you. You've been carrying guilt since your wife passed, and he knows it." Hearing someone articulate what I hadn't dared to say out loud hit harder than I expected. He didn't deliver it with malice, just accuracy. While we talked, another email alert flickered on my phone. Evan again. The subject line read, "Careful what you do next." The body said only you don't want things to get messy. Not a threat in plain words, but the intention lived between the lines. Before I could process it, my phone buzzed twice more. 2 different contractors wrote to confirm that per Evan's instructions, they were canceling the winter maintenance schedule and assuming new arrangements would be made later. He was trying to disrupt the paper trail, undo anything that tied accountability back to him. A friend pulled me aside the next day, concern clouding his expression. "Evan's posting odd things online," he said, "implying you're slipping, suggesting memory problems." The sting wasn't the suggestion itself. It was realizing Evan believed that tactic might work. Another call came from someone in Bend I barely remembered meeting. "Evan's shopping around for buyers," the man said. "Not for the house he's offering some kind of usage rights. Off the books, says he'll have full control soon." The ache in my chest changed shape. Less sorrow, more clarity. Whatever line I'd hoped he wouldn't cross was already behind him. There was no room left for hesitation. Evidence came first. Emotion second. My actions narrowed into a series of tasks, methodical, focused, stripped of sentiment. Every relevant message was archived. Each invoice or service confirmation was copied. Account statements were printed. And in that process, a detail stood out. One of the utility providers had logged a change request earlier that week. Not from my account, but from an IP address the company flagged as unverified. Tracing through my emails, I found the confirmation Evan had attempted to reset the account profile. He hadn't succeeded, but he'd tried to alter information tied to services registered under my name. A cousin called somewhere in the middle of all this. She had always been diplomatic, the type who wanted family to remain intact at any cost. "Maybe give Evan some grace," she urged. "He told us he's trying to take weight off your shoulders. And by doing that, I asked, he thinks it's acceptable to rewrite ownership without my consent." She hesitated. "Just keep things calm. People are worried." Calm. The word rang hollow. Every new piece of information showed Evan had no intention of stopping. The surface was cracking faster than anyone outside the situation wanted to admit. After dinner, my phone chimed with a message from the bank. The phrasing was formal, emotionless, the language of bureaucracy that didn't understand what it meant to receive such a notice from one's own child's actions. Your secondary mortgage application for the Bend property is now entering final verification. Additional documentation may be required. My hand steadied against the table as I reread the statement. Verification stage. Final review. They believed the request was legitimate. Someone had pushed the process far enough that the bank considered it active. I hadn't signed a thing. A long exhale left my chest as I realized the full scope of what Evan had done. The hill I thought I was climbing had become a cliff edge. The room felt still as I set the phone down. Not from peace, just the brief pause before decisions hardened into something irreversible. The notification from the bank arrived early, carrying language that left no room for misunderstanding. They required an immediate explanation for the secondary mortgage application filed under my name. Their system flagged inconsistencies, income data that didn't match my records, a signature that didn't align with previous filings. If I failed to resolve the discrepancies quickly, the Bend property could be temporarily frozen until ownership and authorization were clarified. A freeze meant no access, no control, no movement. It was the closest thing to losing the house without actually signing it away. Another email arrived minutes later. This one wasn't from the bank. Evan had organized a family gathering the previous night, one I hadn't been invited to. A distant relative summarized it. Bluntly, Evan says you're confused about the house. He said you tried to take it back after promising it to him. He's worried about your health. More messages followed. He said you forgot conversations. He said you've been overwhelmed. He said you're going through something since Aunt Laura passed. Each line dug a little deeper, not because they hurt, but because they were familiar. This was the same pattern he'd used countless times, in small arguments twist the story frame his version, as compassion make my stance appear unreasonable. Only now the stakes weren't chores or holiday plans. Now it was property money, identity, legacy. Taking a steady breath, I laid out every document the attorney and I had reviewed. The original deed, the incomplete transfer draft, brokerage correspondence, bank email threads, everything. Watching the papers line up helped restore a sense of order. A call came from the Bend broker next. His tone was strained. Your son told us the family voted to put the house fully under his name. He said paperwork would follow soon, so we paused the rental calendar until we get confirmation. Paused, an understatement for a problem that threatened to derail months of planning for winter tenants and local service crews. That kind of disruption meant fees lost revenue and strained professional relationships. Evan had delivered the closest thing to a killing blow without actually holding the deed. For a moment, something in me wavered. Not anger, but the familiar pull of exhaustion. Years of compromise rolled through my mind, letting him borrow money without repayment, allowing him to dictate family decisions, absorbing every slight, because keeping the peace felt easier than conflict. But standing over the contract now, the truth was undeniable. The transfer he'd told half the family about had never been completed, had never even been close. My signature wasn't on it because I had never given it. The decision crystallized. A folder came off the table, and the deed from the original purchase lay at the top. The ink hadn't faded. The terms were still firm. Majority ownership retained by MR. Gathering the essential documents, I drove to the bank. The loan officer who met me recognized my name immediately. His expression turned cautious, then sympathetic. We received an application appearing to come from you, he began. But something didn't line up. We need clarification. I placed the deed on the table. Then the incomplete transfer draft. Then the email showing Evan's inquiries with the brokerage. Every piece of evidence built on the last. I never authorized a mortgage, I said. I never authorized any ownership transfer. He reviewed each document carefully. Silence stretched on, but it wasn't the kind that demanded patience more, the kind where a person realizes they're dealing with something more serious than they expected. "This looks like attempted identity fraud," he finally said. "We'll suspend all pending requests immediately and launch a formal investigation." The words landed with a physical clarity. Not relief, just fact. A lever had shifted. Next stop was the attorney's office. He scanned the same bundle of papers and leaned back slowly. "This is enough," he said. "More than enough. We'll notify County Records, the brokerage, and the lenders today." Walking out of his office, I felt the air hit differently, not lighter, not triumphant, just level. A balance I hadn't felt since the very beginning of all this. The afternoon stretched ahead as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Cars passed. People navigated their routines. Nothing about the city had changed yet. Everything in my own landscape had. The final documents were ready when I arrived at the attorney's office. A stack of forms waited on the table, each one designed to shut every door Evan had pried open. The attorney guided me through the language termination of usage rights removal of all secondary access restrictions placed on future inquiries, the legal equivalent of locking a gate and welding it shut. My pen moved steadily across each signature line. No shaking, no hesitation. Years of keeping the peace had drained something essential, and this moment restored it piece by piece. The attorney slid over the last form. "This one finalizes full legal protection. After today, he won't be able to initiate anything without a notarized request from you." The edge of the paper brushed my palm. Signing it was less an act of anger than an acknowledgement of truth. Silence had never protected my relationship with Evan. It had only fed his disregard. When the attorney gathered the folders, his voice softened. "You're doing the right thing. Maybe, maybe not. But it was the necessary thing." News traveled quickly. By afternoon, the bank notified me their fraud investigation had officially begun. Evan's application triggered multiple flags once my evidence reached their hands. They asked for follow-up interviews, email records, copies of identification logs, everything I'd already prepared. Another message came from one of Evan's in-laws. "We didn't know he misled us. We're staying out of this." A subtle distancing, but deliberate. Their trust had cracked. Later that evening, the Bend broker called. "Several renters want their deposits back," he said. Evan told them the place was his to lease. Now the refunds aren't lining up. They're upset. He didn't blame me. He just sounded tired. Tired of the chaos. Tired of explanations. Tired of covering for someone who kept slipping further away from the truth. Evan's reputation was unraveling. Not in dramatic fashion, but in the steady way real consequences tend to surface. A few hours passed before he showed up at my apartment. No warning, no courtesy, just 3 firm knocks. I opened the door far enough to face him. He didn't look apologetic. If anything, he looked offended. "You blindsided me," he said. "You filed a fraudulent mortgage," I answered. "This is the result." His jaw tightened. "I did what I had to do for the family. You're the one who turned your back." He'd rewritten the narrative so thoroughly he believed it himself. "You weren't protecting the family," I replied. "You were taking something that didn't belong to you." His eyes flickered with something anger, fear, maybe both. "You betrayed me," he said, voice low. The accusation hung in the air, undeserved yet unsurprising. My silence, once a cushion for him, no longer existed. He didn't know how to speak to the version of me standing in front of him now, measured boundary set, unwilling to bend. "I'm signing the remaining documents today," I told him. "We're done discussing this." He didn't argue. He just turned away, shoulders rigid, heading down the hall like a man who'd just lost a battle he thought he'd already won. By the next morning, I'd initiated the sale of the Bend house. The broker confirmed interest from several buyers, and within days we accepted a strong offer. The closing process began immediately. I canceled every service tied to the property, transferred remaining balances, and closed the dedicated account I'd used for maintenance. Nothing remained for Evan to cling to. Jordan met me for coffee after hearing the news. So he said, folding his arms, "What's next for you?" That question lingered. A month ago, the thought of starting over would have felt reckless. Now it felt overdue. "I'm thinking of moving," I said. "Maybe Bend. Maybe somewhere smaller." He nodded. Sounds like a man reclaiming his life. No pride rose in me. No surge of triumph. Just an even, steady sense that something long distorted had straightened itself. By the time the final check from the sale cleared, the tension around my shoulders eased in a way I hadn't expected. Not relief, just room to breathe. Evan faced the aftermath of his choices without my interference. The bank continued its investigation. His friends kept their distance. His in-laws maintained a polite silence. And for once, none of that demanded a response from me. I spent the next week sorting through my apartment. Old clothes went to donation piles. Files were packed into boxes. Mail was forwarded to a new address, a small rental near the foothills, where I planned to stay until I figured out what the next chapter looked like.